Welcome to the Kingsburg Community Church podcast, Thinking About Faith. We pray that this podcast helps you deepen your faith in God and stir some inner thoughts about the Christian life.
Hi, everyone. It's Pastor Ed, and welcome to the KCC podcast, Thinking About Faith. And this morning, we are thinking for the 44th week of our podcast about uncommon sense. It's a series in Proverbs that we've been looking at to get wisdom about gray areas that aren't necessarily, sin, salvation, right, wrong, but where the Bible has some good advice for us that if we will follow it, we'll find that God uses us and that good things happen in our lives and our lives work out well. And this is the last bit of wisdom from the Proverbs we're going to be looking at. And I think that we're going to spend 2 or 3 weeks on this because the Bible, specifically Proverbs, has so much to say about wisdom, about wealth. We all have wealth. We live in a prosperous nation. And so because of that, we think about money, and money shapes our decisions. It is a great tool, and it also can be a stumbling block or a problem for us if we don't have enough money, if somehow we make a bad decision and lose money, if we have the opportunity to get more money, and because of that, we somehow find that our morals are a little bit pliant, or that we do things that are injurious to either our mental, physical, emotional, or relational health in order to acquire more money. So money is one of those things that it's kind of like a chainsaw. If you need to cut down a tree, there's nothing like a chainsaw, but it's nothing you want to leave out for your kid to play with. It's something that needs to be respected, treated with lots of wisdom. It's a great tool. It's a good thing. The Bible has a lot to say about wealth and about money. There are plenty of passages in the Bible that equate wealth with a sign of God's blessing. So in Job, God's blessing is manifested when Job is restored to more wealth than he lost at the beginning of his testing. In some of the wisdom literature, the story of Solomon and David, their accumulation of wealth was a stand-in, a visible representation of God's blessing upon them. However, we can take that too far. There are brands of Christianity, some people shorthand it and call it the health wealth gospel, that try to say that to all of God's people, if they only have enough faith, they'll become rich. And frankly, this is not a biblically correct teaching, and it flies in the face, and it's really an insult to some of the most fervent and some of the most dedicated believers in the world. If you are a Christian in communist China right now, you are persecuted. There are many jobs that you cannot get. There are places in universities that your children will not be allowed into, and you will be conscribed. Your life is going to be very limited, and you are more than likely going to be poor, and you're going to be oppressed. And to say to that Christian, oh, if you only had more faith, you would be rich, it's just insulting, and it's not biblical. And we could say the same thing about Christians in sub-Saharan Africa, Christians who live in majority Muslim countries, Christians who live in Myanmar or Cambodia or third world countries where there just isn't a whole lot to go around, and where the people who are wealthy get their wealth by stealing and by oppressing people. For us to say, because we're a wealthy country, that if you only had more faith, you'd be rich, that's just an insult. And in fact, we should remember that Jesus had no wealth. He had supporters who were wealthy. He never condemned them for their wealth. He thanked them for their gifts. Paul as well. So Paul never said, to be wealthy is somehow, horrible and it's, unchristian. But at the same time, he was not a wealthy person. He worked. We know that when he was in Corinth, he plied his trade. He was a tent maker. That wasn't a poor occupation. It was kind of a middle class, working class occupation. And so he was able to provide for himself and for the ministry. So in the Bible, poverty and riches are not equated with either the honor of God and blessing of God or with doing something wrong all the time. And sometimes wealth is the sign of God's blessing. But of course, we know that throughout Christian history, there are many people who chose voluntary poverty, like Mother Teresa, in order to serve God, or many people who chose to follow God. And so because of that, they lost everything they had because they were in a majority Muslim country or in some place where Christians were oppressed and had to, maybe even go to a concentration camp or something like that. That's what happens to Christians in North Korea. And again, it would be insulting to say that they just don't have enough faith. Proverbs 30 gives us a nice balance about how the Bible views wealth. There's a prayer in Proverbs 30 about halfway through verse 30, verses 8 and 9, halfway through Proverbs 30, verse 8, and then all of verse 9. It says this, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or I may become poor and steal, and so dishonor the name of my God." There's a middle ground there. Don't make me rich, but don't make me poor. As if I'm rich, and he observes, even back in Proverbs, that people who are, mega rich, that they have too much and they very easily disown God. And it's rhetorical. They say, basically with their life says, "Who is the Lord?" Think of the mega rich billionaires that we hear their names in American society. Are any of them faithful Christians? It would be nice if any of them were. I do not know any of them that are faithful Christians. When I think of billionaire, I think of a person whose God is wealth. So I don't want to be that rich, is what the prayer says. Also, I don't want to be poor, because you need a certain amount of wealth in order to exist in this world. And if the need is too great, I may steal and dishonor the name of God. Remember the story of Les Mis, where Jean Valjean is first imprisoned. He ends up in prison for years and years, but he's first imprisoned for breaking the window of a bakery to steal bread for his sister and her son who are starving to death. And that was true of post-revolutionary France. If you didn't have money, they would let you starve. Don't want to be so poor that I would be tempted to steal. True wealth is found in contentment and the fear of the Lord. Paul notes this in Philippians chapter 4, verse 11. He says, "I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength." The one thing that we can control to a certain extent is our appetite for the things that our money can buy. And if we keep our appetites modest, then we find that we have a surplus. It's whenever we let, our televisions tell us that we have to have a new car and we have to have the best and the brightest, and we have to, travel the 7 seas, and we have to do all the things that our neighbors do. That's when we find that we spend more than we make. Some of the best financial advice I ever got was actually from a roommate when I was just finishing business school. We were both in business school together. He was not one of my instructors or anything like that, but we were talking about, getting a job. And for the first time, we had money, instead of spending to go to school and to pay rent, we were actually making money. And he said, let's continue to live like we lived while we were in college. And then we'll be able to put money in the bank. And he said a phrase that he was not a Christian person. He was a capitalist. But he said something that stuck with me ever since. He said, if you spend less than you make, you're going to be okay. If you spend less than you make, you're going to be okay. He had come when he was 3 years old. His parents had brought him from Hong Kong to the United States. They were Chinese immigrants. And first they lived over a Chinese laundry in Los Angeles. Then they moved to New York City and they lived over a Chinese restaurant. And Dave's dad worked at both of those establishments, and they saved enough money. He was working in Chinese restaurants, and I think he moved to San Francisco, worked in Chinese restaurants there, and became a cook, and learned enough that he opened a Chinese takeout restaurant. I think it had one table, so it was primarily just a Chinese takeout place in San Jose. And right about the time Dave and I were in college together, I know his father became a millionaire, which back then was a big deal because he had made investments in real estate in the South Bay area, and he had was pretty good with stocks and bonds. But he still went to work every day, 7 days a week, at the Chinese takeout, and he taught his son, if you spend less than you make, you're going to be okay. And that was great wisdom to adjust our appetites that we can live less lavishly than we can afford. Gretchen and I just got back from Europe, and one of the things that we noticed was that we just don't like going out to eat every meal. It's too much of a hassle. So when we were in Amsterdam and Rotterdam, what we would do, we would go out to dinner. Usually breakfast was a couple of pastries from the store, and we would go to a coffee place and get, American coffee and eat chocolate croissant. And that was breakfast. And lunch, we would go to the same store and just buy packaged sandwiches and chips and fruit. And they always had some wonderful things. And of course, for us, Coke Zeros, because they have discovered Coke Zero in Europe. It's wonderful. And that was lunch. And then we would go out for dinner. And it wasn't because we couldn't afford to go out to lunch. It was just, who can eat that much food? So if you cultivate those habits of frugality, you don't even notice you're being frugal. It's just the way you live. Of course, the Bible has lots of wisdom about measuring our materialism and our desires for more. And the Bible continually says that greed leads to ruin and spiritual emptiness. And of course, the early church knew this very well when they decided to make a list of the 7 deadly sins. Greed is one of them. Proverbs 23:4 says, "Do not wear yourself out to get rich. Do not trust your own cleverness. In other words, there are things that are more important than getting rich. Honoring God, loving your family. Proverbs 11:28, those who trust in their riches will fall, but the righteous will thrive like a green leaf. I'm fortunate. I was raised by blue-collar parents. Neither of them went to college, and they wanted us to go to college because they wanted us to have a better life, a more prosperous life than they had. But they were very wise about their money. They kind of had to be, because there was enough, but there was just enough. Never went without a meal, but there wasn't a whole lot of surplus there. But they also taught us that you should work hard at whatever you can do for a job, and that there's no such thing as a job that's beneath you. My uncle worked at the cannery. By the time he retired, he was a foreman, but most of the time he was just a simple laborer at a cannery. It was not a high status job, but he had an 8th grade education, so it was what he could get. But we were taught that any honest job that provided you a living was a good job, and that God instructed us to work as if we were working for God and not for our boss. And that's just kind of how my parents taught me to work, that there's no such thing as a menial job or a job that's beneath you. Just get a job, and that will provide an income, and you'll be able to provide for yourself and those whom you love. Now, fortunately, Gretchen and I do have college educations, and because of that, we're always able to have jobs that paid relatively well. But I'll tell on Gretchen here, I kind of had a joke with her that was mostly true, that whenever she got a new qualification or a new degree, she always made less money. And that's absolutely true. She just, she wasn't doing her nursing career, to make a lot of money. And so because of that, she makes many of her graduates who are, it's a 2-year, well, actually takes more than 2 years, but it's an AS degree in nursing from Fresno City. Within 4 or 5 years, they're making more than she makes. But she's doing it because she loves teaching, and she's very good at it. And by training the new generation of nurses, and of course she's a pediatric nurse, so she's always has her eye out on trying to recruit the best students at Valley Children's to work at Valley Children's. She's doing something that's worth more than the money that she could make. You have to have enough to live. You have to have enough to pay the mortgage, and we raised our kids. We sent our kids to college, so there was always enough. But to make as much money as you cannot be the goal of the Christian. If you're making money to give as much as you can, well, that's a good thing. The Bible also tells us that diligence leads to prosperity. And we talked earlier about the value of hard work. Hard work is consistently praised as the path to financial stability. Proverbs 10:4 says, lazy hands make for poverty, but diligent hands bring wealth. I think it's hysterical. Do a word search in Proverbs on the word sluggard, and you'll see all the condemnations of the lazy man who is the sluggard. Proverbs 14, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. There was a debate when I was in college about whether Jesus would have been a socialist or a capitalist. It's ridiculous. Jesus lived in a totally different time. So that's a speculation right up there with would Jesus have been, well, of course he would have been a Dodger fan, but would he rather root for baseball or football? Chances are neither. He's from the Middle East. He's probably a soccer fan. Okay. But it doesn't make any sense. But there were people on the capitalist side economically who wanted to claim Jesus for their own, and people on the socialist side who wanted to claim Jesus for their own. Kind of a ridiculous idea. I do know this, that when Jesus created, Jesus was active in creation. The Bible says that all things were created through him, and that when he created the world, there were certain mechanisms within the world that align with a capitalist understanding. And that is, in general, the harder you work, the more you have. So if you have a field and you only plant 5 acres, you're only going to get a crop of 5 acres. If you plant 20 acres, it's harder work, but you're going to get 20 acres of yield. And that's the way the world works. If you fish, you get up early and go fish in the morning, you're going to catch more fish than if you sleep in and try to fish in the middle of the day. So the world is designed that it's not a guarantee, but it's designed that the harder you work, the greater the yield for your work. And that's true of hunter-gatherers as well as Dutch merchantmen. Just was in Amsterdam, learned a lot about the Dutch East India country, as well as, American capitalists on Wall Street. There's a correlation between hard work and profit. Proverbs 28:19 says this: "Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits will have plenty of poverty." Proverbs 21:5, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." And we're going to expand upon that last verse next week as we talk about some bad habits with wealth that you might want to consider avoiding because they have more of a correlation with poverty and with heartbreak than they do with success. I want to finish this time here with just a brief word of advice that just comes from my experience, and that is that wealth that is built slowly over time is durable wealth. And so, especially if you're a young person, spend less than you make. Make sure you tithe and make sure you save. We're getting to the point, Gretchen and I, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. We're getting to the point where she has one more year of work and then we're both retired. And you don't think a lot about your retirement when you're in your 20s and 30s, but you should. We started saving in our 30s just because somebody told us we should. And so we did. And boy, am I glad we did, because now when we look at a retirement, it should be relatively stress-free when it comes to finances, between what we have saved in retirement accounts, a house that's almost paid off, cars that are paid off. We're going to be plenty okay in our retirement. But that was a decision that we started making back when we were in our 30s, and now in our 60s. We're so glad we did. Slow and steady really does win the race. And you don't have to be a Christian to know that. Let's go on YouTube. There's a million wealth building websites out there. Some of them are Christian. I would counsel you to use the Christian ones, but the secular ones, they're still good principles of saving and wise investments, not these crazy speculative things. Again, I don't think it's a sin to invest in meme coins. I just don't think it's very wise. If you invest in boring investments that give a standard return, you're going to do just fine, because historically investments will double every 8 years. And so it's not something you brag about, but it's enough to build wealth that you can return on. Okay, that's all we have for today. Again, thank you for listening, and tune in next week to hear more about wisdom about wealth. Take care.